Thanks, Tom, and thank you, and welcome back from the unsung but truly important part of the day, lunch, when you get to talk with each other. I'm from MIT, and I have been in there all my life. It's kind of like, maybe I know something about healthcare. It's like going to the hospital as a patient and coming out as a doctor. As an academic, I only have a 1-hour talk, so I'm going to talk really quickly and compress it to 20 minutes. Okay, because you see, the thing about academics is that's what we do, we talk. If you want us to shut up, it costs you more. If you want us to not show up at all, you can't afford it. So let me sort of jump right in and give you a sense of some of the things that I want to talk about. And one of the things that I'm going to try and leave you with a message, but I know the message I'm going to leave here with, and the image that I'm going to leave this entire meeting with, unless something changes later in the afternoon, and that is the message of Sarah Palin sitting in the basement of the White House with my medical records. It's going to cause me to have an entirely new relationship with my MRI doctor. And I go to the MRI often because I truly feel wonderful after I've been magnetized. It's got a terrific therapeutic effect, but people accuse us in the laboratory of being, working on things like disruptive technologies. And so what I want to do is I want to spend 20 minutes and debunk that and tell you that it's not about disruptive technologies, it's about disruptive societies. And if you want to continue with the theme of occupying things, then maybe what I'll try to get you to join me in doing is occupying the airwaves. Because that's one of the last bastions, I'm being serious about this, that's one of the last bastions of places where an occupation is necessary. But my theme and one of my thoughts, besides these threshold events that I'll tell you a little about, is that disruption is in the eye of the beholder. And let me give you a sense of what I mean by that. Back in 2003, I started a research group in the laboratory, and the theme of that research group was what we called viral communications. Now, remember, I've been at the Media Lab for like 1.5 times as long as it's existed, so I'm one of the last men standing, I'm one of the old guys there, and I'm a child of the 60s. Now, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, what did we do? We were people who were the radicals. We democratized technology. Back in those days, there were big mainframes and little terminals, and in the 70s, we started hypothesizing and building and working with what would become personal computers that sort of made everybody equal instead of the big guys and the little terminals. It's like the old advertisement from the 1880s, God made big men and God made small men, and Colt made the 45 to make them all equal, right? So, IBM made big computers and DEC made little terminals, and we made the PC to make them all equal, right? So in 2003, there was one last bastion of inequality, and that bastion was in the world of radio. And that is to say that the world of radio was very much like the world of mainframe computing in the 70s. There were big towers, that had all the intelligence and all the power, be they 50,000 watt, broadcast antennas that were radiating WBZ out to Jupiter, or, whether they were cell towers that you had to subscribe to. And there were dumb cell phones. Now, if you wind your thinking back, remember that in 2003, a cell phone could not technically talk to another one. Okay, so if the tower wasn't there, you couldn't beam a message across the room. You could only make that phone work in concert with the tower. Very much like the 70s, where those terminals could only work in concert with that mainframe. So this is all a story about disruption now. So the thing that we worked on, what we tried to do is we said, why don't we get smart and wind radio up to the future and say, suppose we made every cell phone as smart as a tower. Then maybe we wouldn't need towers at all. And if somebody wanted to talk to somebody else, they could pass the message to their friend, and it would go to the next person, and what we'd have it called as a mesh of all of these kinds of phones together, and they would all talk to each other. And they'd be pretty powerful. Now, a side benefit of that was potentially, if you could do that, you might actually be able to have more radios than you could have before. Just like, you know, in the world of PCs, as you all got PCs, you could buy more of them with scale. You could get as many as you wanted until you ran out of electricity. You could just keep adding PCs, but you can't do that with radios, because radio is thought of as an exclusionary medium, and that's why we should occupy it, because it's not. And that is to say, when the spectrum is given to somebody, someone else can't have it. And when someone's using it, someone else can't. So we tried to make those radios work together to make the very radio spectrum grow. Now that, remember, this is about disruption. That was considered a disruptive idea, and I became sort of the nemesis of the phone companies, as you might imagine, because if you don't need a tower, then you don't need them. And they didn't like that. Okay, but then they thought about that for a minute, and they said to themselves, well, wait a minute. If a cell phone is easy enough to be a tower, then maybe we can put up towers everywhere. And maybe towers needn't cost $250,000, and the phone company could put those up. To give you a sense of that, in about 2004, 2005, I was having dinner with this guy, Kent Matthey, who was president of Singular. There was a Singular then. Singular enterprise businesses, and he had a problem. And his problem was, in New York City, all the offices are at the outside of the building and cell phones work there, but all the conference rooms are in the middle, kind of at the core of the building, no windows, and the cell phones didn't work there. So he put one of those little towers on top of the elevator shafts in those buildings, and suddenly the signal leaked out of the shaft into the conference rooms, and people had service, and as a byproduct, you also had service in the elevator. Right? So that was a disruptive technology, a viral technology. Make the phones smart, make the phones powerful, give them to everybody, everybody's a tower. But it wasn't so disruptive after all. So that's the point. Disruption is in the eye of the beholder. It's not in the eye of the technology. And these days, it's not even in the eye of the beholder. It's in the eye of society. Let me give you an example. One of the ways I think about things is in the context of what I call threshold events. Okay, these are like paradigm shifts. These are what happens when some little thing changes, and that little thing changes the entire world. Just to give you a simple example, in the 70s, we did a lot of work on electronic books. Okay, we spent time crafting type that would appear on a computer screen and look as good as it would on the printed page, kind of the way your computers look today, right? And laying out the type. We even, in 1977 or 78, we built a computer that animated flipping the pages of a book exactly the same way that you animate them on your iPad today if you use Apple's book. Okay, so we actually really did all that stuff in 1978, 77, whatever. Okay, and everybody said, well, that's fine, but nobody's going to read a book staring at a 100-watt light bulb. And that's what a television set sort of is. And it was right. Nobody was going to read a book staring at a screen like that. Well, a few years later, along came Joe Jacobson to the Media Lab. Joe had an idea that he wanted to make an electronic book where every page of the book was filled with ink that could change. And in Joe's mind, the future bookshelf that you had would consist of one book. And you'd reach up and grab that book, and you'd pull it down, and when you opened it, it would be the book you wanted. Okay, well, that turned into e-ink. That turned into the Kindle. And suddenly people started reading books because it wasn't a 100-watt light bulb anymore. It was a screen that was paperback. Now that is a threshold event. Once society started reading, once they turned that corner, ironically, they're now reading them on 100-watt light bulbs, you know, more illuminated iPads, but nevertheless, once society turned that corner, that's a threshold event, and books are over. They're dead as far as anyone is concerned. The rest is just a little bit of extra history that has to be written. Now, I say this to people all the time, and they always say, Andy, I like my books, and I like my newspaper. I promise you, I'm not going to take your newspaper and book away. All of those artifacts will exist for a long time. Scrolls still exist. There's one behind the ark in every synagogue, okay? But, you know, so you can keep your book, you can keep your newspaper, and that's fine. But the problem is, one of these days, you're going to die, okay? And you're going to leave this stuff to your kid. And your daughter's going to walk in to your kitchen and see the table piled with books and say, "Good God, why didn't Mom just leave me a thumb drive?" They're not even leather. Okay, so the threshold event was getting people to read those books on a screen. Now, what are the other threshold events? Okay, well, think about television, right? I mean, for years you look and you work in television, and there is this industry called the television industry. It's a totally synthetic industry. They invented it so they could have their own jargon and conferences and stuff like that. Okay, and it's kind of moribund, and everybody kind of knows that except them. So they invent new words to keep themselves happy and alive. But okay, but for years and years, the television industry was based on the theory that an American in the living room was a potato, okay, right? Kind of like my dog, very much like a cauliflower, slightly mobile, not much smarter, right? But and sits on a couch, and people in the American living room could do nothing more than occasionally twitch. Okay, to click a knob, right? That was the view of the television industry. So what's the threshold event there? Well, to my mind, the threshold event in television is when you put a keyboard in the American living room. Okay, when a keyboard goes in the American living room, that model is gone, and suddenly, instead of having a selection device that can pick a channel, you have an exploration device that can open up the world to you. Now, why do I say a keyboard? Some of you, not many, but some of you may be old enough to remember there was a time when a keyboard was infamata in an executive office, right? Executives didn't have typewriters. They didn't have keyboards. Their secretaries did that. It's kind of like the way Germany is today, right? I think the Germans still have their secretaries read their email and take dictation. There was a threshold event when a keyboard found its way into the executive office. Likewise, when a keyboard finds its way into the American living room, then that's the threshold event, and the rest is just the aftermath. Now, I have some numbers. In 2008, according to my friends in the Consumer Electronics Association, they don't measure keyboards in television sets. I got one some time ago that had the keyboard and the remote control. So that prompted me to think about it. But they do measure TVs that have internet access associated with them. You can plug the TV into the internet. So in 2008, 300,000 TVs in America were sold with internet access. Not all of them were used. You can impugn me on that. But nevertheless, they were sold. 3 million were sold in 2009, okay, the year after that. Factor of 10 higher. Then in 2010, a factor of 8 higher than that. 7 million television sets were sold. Now, these are threshold events. These are things that, and I'm not telling you to change. You're welcome to read your newspaper. There is nothing worse than having like a bunch of 60-year-old people like me trying to act as hip as, the kids today. Don't do it. It's not pretty, okay? And believe me, I'm around these kids all the time. That's my life, and they keep telling me that, right? Don't do it, Andy. It's not pretty. But you notice these threshold events, and that's what starts to tell you. Now, what are some of the other ones that are sort of coming along? I mean, I think, remember my telephone of 2003? Okay, that couldn't talk to any other telephone. Well, now it's pretty commonplace that they can. But what's the threshold event in mobility and the threshold event in all these devices and gizmos? I don't know. I'm not sure how to characterize it. When they got Wi-Fi, so they were independent of the tower, I think the threshold event for them is when they got the ability to run a program that you could load, your own app, not something from the carrier. And last year or so, when those apps were designed so that they could run in the background, which means that you don't just turn on the app and turn it off and go back to being a television. You turn on the app and the phone does that all the time that it's in your pocket, whether it's tracing where you run, or it's tracing sensors from your body to see how healthy you are, or whether it's communicating and getting you messages. The point is that you had always on apps in your phone. That's a threshold event. Let me give you an example as to the impact of that. Here's one of my favorite examples, messaging. How many of you people text? We call it SMSing. I text all the time. It's the only way I can talk to my daughter. And it's not because I'm trying to be hip, and I don't mean to say it in any glib sense. She's in law school, and she doesn't have time to take a call. But I can send her a little message, call later, and she can glance at her phone and see it, and I know she got it, and it's sort of an efficient way of communicating. So I'm not demeaning text at all. But let's consider the alternative. Think about Twitter. I don't know how many of you tweet, but Twitter is kind of the opposite of a messaging service. But what can it do? You can send a message to everybody. You can send a message to groups. You can send it to friends. There's no phone number involved. It works with things. You could imagine a future where your clothes dryer sent a tweet to your refrigerator and said, look, I'm going to dry the clothes now. Can you hang on for a moment so we don't blow the electric bill? Or, you know, one of my favorites is like the dog collar, so I could tweet the dog, and, you know, then the dog would come back into the house, or the dog could tweet. These are examples of things that the phone company will never do because they have a rounding error problem, right? If it has less than 7 zeros in front of it, they round it down to 0 and decide it's not a big enough business. Yeah, missing the boat on the dog collar. But the point is that there's all of these kinds of opportunities out there for this kind of messaging service. But you don't do it by and large, but the large number of you tweet. Oh yeah, there's another thing I forgot to say about Twitter that's distinctive, and that is it's free. That counts. By the way, if you want to know why the internet caught on, it's because it was free in 1981. If you want to know why the web caught on, it's because Tim Berners-Lee spent 2 months inventing it and 6 months convincing CERN that it had to be free. So there's something kind of magical about free, that $1 doesn't, you know, come close to being. So compare that with texting. SMS, right, which exists on your phone now. Well, it's got the first mover advantage. It's built into every phone, runs on all the phones. It runs no matter what you're doing with your phone, it's kind of always running, and it's sort of free, but not really. It's a $20 billion a year business, according to the Times last week, under threat from all of these other things like messaging. Now, you look at Twitter. Twitter in the last 3 years grown from 5,000 to 50 million messages a month, and that's a year ago, and that's exponential growth. I just was communicating earlier today with one of my graduate students about these kinds of things. In Korea, there's a system called Kakao that has 27 million users. I think it's been around for about a year and a half, does absolutely everything Twitter does. Now, which one do you think is going to last? Where's the threshold event? When this app can run on your phone, when it's in your pocket, when you didn't deliberately invoke it, that first message, that first mover advantage of SMS goes away. That's the threshold event. I haven't got much time, and I promised you I had 60 minutes that I had to compress into 20, and at the end of the 20 minutes, I'll just take a deep breath and reoxygenate myself. You know, where do I kind of think some of these things are going next? Let me give you my own personal hypothesis, which is usually wrong. Okay, that's my job. I'm in a laboratory. I'm supposed to be wrong all the time. The students are right and they graduate. You guys are right and you get rich. I just stay in the lab and get wrong. But what I think is happening is that we're at the threshold of what I think of as a pendulum swing back to reality. Okay, we spent the last 15 years, 16 years thinking about virtual everything, right? The end limit of which is like Second Life, where the entire world is completely virtual, as if the future is going to be, you know, each person in the world orbiting space in their own capsule, interacting with everyone else through an HD TV screen, right? And I think what we're about to see is a swing back to the physical world around us starting to matter. I sort of illustrate this with this slide. This is the slide of the office of a CEO built in 1929 of a shoe company in Austria. The company's still in existence. It's called Bata. And on the left is a picture of his office, but if you look at the door in his office, it's kind of funny. Above the door, there's that little row of white dots. Those white dots are floor enunciators, and his office is an elevator. And he built his office so that he could stay in touch with everyone in his factory by moving the office up and down and opening the doors. So that's the 1929 version of space. So just to give you an example of what I sort of mean by that, and I don't want to run too much over the time, we did a very simple example. The students did this. We called it electric price tags, and all we did was we built this sort of like, supermarket shelf, but instead of having price tags in front of each of the cereals, we put a little display that could communicate. We used phones because that was the easiest one that was at hand, okay? Now you walk up to the shelf and you open up the web page on your phone and you can ask things about the cereals. Which one's the oldest, which is the most expensive, you know, which one has the most calories, which one's gluten-free, which is what the buttons pressed on that phone there. But instead of getting the answer on your phone, the answer appears on the shelf in front of you. Now, what does that do? That brings the interaction away from you looking here, a device that's great at bringing the far near. That's what phones are good for, right? But it takes the interaction and expands it into the space and opens it up for other people to talk about with you. Fidelity took a look at that and said, maybe we want to put that in our retail stores and let us see what people are perusing, and suddenly we can all talk about that. The sensing technology, which years ago would have been an incredible threshold, difficult to attain, where you might say, I want to know where all the buses are. Someone's going to say, what am I going to do, put GPS on every bus? It's done. It's already there. We're going to put cameras on every corner. Go to England. It's already there. The sensing is out there. We're running out of juice in the device. The device, notwithstanding electricity flowing through the air, which is okay as long as you're not wearing a wedding ring. It'll get mighty hot. That kind of technology, the mandate of having these devices cooperate is there. So intimate communication of each one of your devices working in this general ecology of networking, computing, people, and the physical world around you, that's the next threshold. That's the one I think we're about to cross. Thank you very much.